Welcome, everyone, to Tim's Vinyl Confessions. I'm Tim Derling, and it is the beginning of a new deep dive series. Had a lot of fun doing the Y&T deep dive series. Now, I know a lot of folks enjoyed that this time around. I'm going to be talking about another one of my favorite bands, Kansas, and I've got a certified Kansas, I'll call him an expert with me, Mr. Jeff Wagner. I've had
Hello.
Jeff on before to talk about his awesome Fates Warning book, Destination Onward. But I mean, if you need a quick example of Jeff's Kansas cred, anybody who owns this little package here, another fork in the road, can thank Jeff for its existence, I guess, or the track listing. Talk to me a little bit about that, Jeff.
Yeah, I mean, I worked with Kansas at Inside Out from the time they were signed, and then did the Prelude Implicit album. I was there for all of that. Went up to New York to meet them and introduced them to the distributor, and so I was kind of like label guy. I was product manager for the U.S. For Inside Out when we signed them, and of course we were all thrilled to have Kansas on the label. And so I developed the relationship with the band that way. Saw them live a bunch of times. Had just a ton to do with them, and through all of that, after I left Inside Out, Phil Ehart, the drummer and basically the manager, co-manager of the band, kind of retained me for a few other projects. For The Absence of Presence, they did like this large media book type presentation of the album, which had like interviews with each guy, which I did. So that was the first bit of writing that they hired me to do. And then when it came time for them to do the 50th anniversary, Thomas Weber of Inside Out and Phil discussed me apparently in terms of like who should head this project, who should really take care of it all. So I was able to not only do all the liner notes, but they allowed me to do the track list. I mean, that is a super fan's dream, to take a band's entire career and get to select the tracks. And I presented the tracks to Phil and Thomas, and I think there were only about one or two exceptions that they had to my choices. Otherwise, they let it ride. I have to say, one really frustrating aspect of that project is that the U.S., for various contractual bullshit reasons, could not have the Morse tracks on there. There was it just got tied up with record company crap. Over in
was
Europe,
going to ask you about. I would be remiss if I didn't ask you about that, because if you get it in Europe, it's got tracks from Power and In the Spirit of Things. But
exactly.
Here it goes from Freaks of Nature to Drastic Measures.
Unfortunately, yeah.
Yeah.
And that looks like a big gap to me, but there was nothing we could do, and we just had to settle. So I was able to pick a couple extra ones from Monolith and Audio Visions and round it out. But yeah, what a dream gig that was. And I was in contact with a few Kansas super fans to get all that memorabilia that you see in the booklet and on the album cover, so we could get that all. I had a professional photographer come here and photograph all this stuff that these guys sent me in big boxes. I had like 3 big boxes of like Kansas stuff from all over the years. It was like a Kansas museum in my room for about a week. But yeah, it was a great project, and I was really, really honored that they chose me to do it. And yeah, just kind of pinching myself sometimes that those guys trust me that much.
And I got to say, Jeff, I like the choices you made for which versions were going to be live, which were going to be from, say, Always Never the Same. So it's not just a standard. It's not just the standard studio tracks. I was thinking, as far as the Morse tracks, did you ever think about maybe using, this is the super geeky Kansas fan coming up, using something like the King Biscuit concert that came out from In the Spirit of Things tour? Or
yeah, I think that was discussed, and it just wasn't, again, it wasn't accessible or available in terms of like getting the license, because some of that sort of stuff really exists in a weird little netherworld of like, who do we even contact, who has the rights to that. So there was some of that too. And yeah, it was a little daunting. It was, and of course, like you say, I'm glad you noted that. Like, I picked Carry On Wayward Son and Dust in the Wind from other albums, because everybody's heard the studio tracks. They're wonderful. I mean, they're evergreen. But yeah, I figured if, they've had enough other greatest hits type comps or collections or whatever, I figured maybe just mix it up a little bit that way as well. And you probably noticed too that and this was kind of my idea, but I think the band were on the complete same page, that every era is pretty equally represented. It's not like you have a ton of left Overture era stuff and just a little bit of Freaks of Nature. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
it's all pretty equal because it was the whole celebration of this band have these albums. I mean, at the time, Freaks of Nature was their most important album to them. This
Yeah.
is the thing that they were working on and believing in. And I think that if we're representing their 50 years, we have to do it right. I'd like to think that we did.
And I like the fact that it goes backwards. It starts in the very present with a very cool re-recording of the very first song from their demo tape. And we're going to be talking about the album, Can I Tell You? Whose
Yep.
idea was that to have the current band re-record that song?
It was the current band. It was Kansas. It wasn't Thomas. It certainly wasn't me. But it was the band. And I think that emerged because what was the deal? Um, I don't, I should know this. I'm forgetting. But I think that the band wanted to bring that one back to the live set, and it was sounding so good, and they knew the 50th anniversary was on the horizon. They were like, we're playing with this with the same kind of energy as we did when we were kids, and we're 50 years older. But boy, this sounds great.
Yeah.
Let's record it. And of course, that was a nice new thing to offer and start the collection with. The new band, the latest lineup, doing a track that was really instrumental in getting them signed, and then working backwards, which was kind of my idea. And I suppose maybe a kernel was planted with the Rush tour,
Our
that
40,
Rush did,
exactly. Yeah.
where they
Yeah.
went backwards,
Yeah.
which I thought was a great idea in terms of celebrating your anniversary and working back to the earliest days. So yeah, I think it worked out well. Plus, I wanted to focus on the new lineup. So you start with the Absence of Present stuff, and you get Prelude Implicit.
It,
And I think that stuff's so strong.
it's fantastic. Disc one, it gives you such a taste of those. I mean, I'm still going to call Freaks of Nature a more recent album, right? 90s and beyond.
Sure, yeah, relative, yeah,
And
to the
I think that it
discography.
gives a real.
You froze up.
That song is Perfect Lover
Oh,
from the original best of, because when that got reissued, that got left off. Is that just a track that the band doesn't seem to want to
well,
acknowledge it?
yeah, I
Or?
mean yeah, honestly, I don't love that song, and I wouldn't have picked it.
Oh, okay. I just
Um,
thought for its relative rarity, that's one. Track listing is great. Don't get me wrong.
yeah,
That was just so. I'm like, man, if you didn't have that original best of, you're you're gonna lose that song.
that's true. That's true. And I'm not a type of fan that I don't collect best ofs. So Perfect Lover is one of those things I have on my iTunes because I want to have every single Kansas track in
Right.
existence. But yeah, I don't really have a true copy. So you're making me rethink my decision now.
No, no,
uh,
and that wasn't my intention. It's just something that as a super geeky fan I noticed, but there's way more things that I noticed that were good things, like having non-studio versions of The Wall and Carry On and Dust in the Wind, because we've all got those,
yeah.
and anybody that's just got a casual best of has those. So why not, if they're going to shell out for another collection, give them something different. And this is like the ultimate Kansas record store. I just love this cover.
Yeah,
But
that was actually two ladies in Germany. We took a picture of them in a record store, and of course, all the things on the wall and the records in the original photo, which I have. I should share that with you privately. I don't think they want that out publicly, but it's funny because it's got like Bathory records in the back and like metal, other weird
yeah,
extreme
yeah.
records.
And of
But we,
course,
of
that's a
course,
nice nod to Two for the Show.
that's the whole idea. Yep. The whole idea
Yeah.
was to go back to the Two for the Show motif and update it with all the Kansas memorabilia from all the years. So it was fun to put that together, man. That was
Yeah.
a blast. Yeah.
I listened to it a fair bit. It's a really good collection.
Cool.
But yeah, it's interesting to me. Record label stuff is fascinating to me, and I often wonder why. Like when I was younger, I used to wonder why best ofs would come out and there'd be soundtrack songs missing. And now I realize that it costs so much to get a song from it's not just a record label, it's a movie studio.
Yeah.
So it's just not worth it. So
Yeah.
um but yeah, the fact that in Europe they were able to get those tracks from Universal, and yeah, but that's all right because the diehard Kansas fans have the Morse albums anyway. So, but let's get into the deep dive and what we do with the deep dive for those that never watched the Y&T one. We're just going to go through each of the band's studio albums, starting with the first, going to the most current, and we're going to go in depth and our thoughts on the album and everything to do with it. So we're going to start 1974, the one that started it all off, the self-titled debut from Kansas. Now, I didn't discover this album until about 1993. When did this album first hit? When did you first discover this particular album, Jeff?
Well, I got into Kansas about 2000 or 2001. So I actually came to them a little bit late in terms of like, I had been delving in metal and even prog, uh, certainly metal in the 80s and then prog in the 90s. My two great loves in music. Kansas escaped me a little bit until a friend of mine who was really into them and knew I was into prog, he sent me I'm dating this, but he sent me a cassette. I still had a cassette deck in my car, and it had Death of Mother Nature Suite on it. It had Icarus, Born on Wings of Steel, which it's one of my favorite songs of all time now. I'll never forget first hearing Icarus and going, whoa. And all the other stuff. He tailor made that for me, this cassette, knowing that I would love it, and I did. And man, I was a fan immediately. Got all the albums real quickly. I just went to I was working in New York City at the time at Metal Maniacs. And on my lunch break, I'd go to record stores and try to find all the Kansas records. I became pretty obsessed pretty quickly. So yeah, the first album would have been on my radar around that time when I fell for them.
Yeah,
And I love it. It's, to this day, probably a top 3 Kansas album for me. I think it's so strong. And anybody who's heard the early Kansas stuff before this, Cuneiform put out a thing called songs. What was it called? Songs from Kansas, 1971 to 73, or something like this. Um, that details kind of like a lot of the early tracks. You can hear them building up to this first record. This is one of those classic first records where they had a lot of time to think about this and put a lineup together and put a song listing together. It wasn't slapdash. It wasn't done quickly. It was a few years of build into the Kansas we hear on the first record. So it's very strong in that sense. It's a very well formed band. They come out swinging hard.
yeah, it doesn't have any of those sort of naive first, baby steps that some debuts have. I mean, you already, alluded to Rush, and they're one of my favorite bands, but I love the first Rush album, but you can tell it's a first album.
For sure.
Obviously, Neil Peart's not on it, but just the same, it sounds like a first album. This sounds
Yeah,
like a fully realized, and the liner notes, yeah, it says, suffice to say that in spite of the fact this is our first record, we have around 50 years of combined musical experience in one of the most unmusical environments imaginable. One thing I really do like on here, and maybe because I know you've spoken to Phil and Richard, the sole remaining original guys. Thanks and unthanks are, as usual, too numerous to mention, but we pour out both to those deserving, and they know who they are. Did they ever talk about what that was? There anybody in particular that they were sort of like told you we'd get a record out?
a lot of local people that
Yeah,
if I name them, you wouldn't recognize them. They're just like a lot of local people who at the time either didn't grasp what they were doing. Because if you listen to that really early stuff, in fact, I'm going to grab that real quick. Sorry about this. I know this is
yeah,
really.
no problem. To be quite honest with you, I'm waiting on that to come from Discogs
I
because
think you
you got
told
me
me you
curious.
got this.
Yeah,
Yeah,
you
this
got
is
me
that.
curious about that, so I'm waiting. Yeah, Protocol.
Yeah,
Yeah,
early recordings from Kansas, 71, 73. It's named Protocol simply because they can't call it Kansas, but this is early Kansas, and it's on cuneiform. Excellent material, but that stuff's even more radically weird and proggy than even the proggy Kansas we know. So I think they got a lot of resistance from certain people locally back then. But then again, they had a lot of support, and I'm sure some people were just gobsmacked by this weird little band from middle of nowhere Kansas playing this wild radical music. So yeah, they were individual from the start, and I suppose that those liner notes in the first album kind of underscored how um, unique they were amongst their peers. Who I'm sure in the bar scene there was nobody like playing music like Kansas was. You know.
No, I mean,
Yeah.
even though bands like Yes and Genesis were emerging, we're talking about the middle of Kansas here. So,
Sure. Exactly.
yeah. So
Yeah.
it's pretty amazing. It's pretty amazing that they, made it out, so to speak. I
Yeah.
want to talk about the cover. The cover is so striking, and Kansas fans know the origin of it. Uh, Anyone who's seen the Miracles Out of Nowhere documentary knows that Phil Ehart saw this painting of John Brown. It's called Tragic Prelude, and always knew that if he had a band, he wanted that to be on the cover. John Brown more or less has become sort of a symbol of the band. I'll stop short of saying mascot, but that image has appeared on a lot of different releases over the years, like the
Yeah.
best of and the box set.
Mm, sure.
Um, do you think that's a representation of the band, like where they were at, or did Phil just plain like the image of it?
I think he liked the image, but I think he liked some of the symbolism behind it, some of the defiance, some of the history. I mean, obviously, they've written a lot about the Native American plight and things of that nature. So I think it just really went well and shoehorned right into what they're all about, and it just spoke to him. But yeah, it is an enduring image, and it's the one that comes to mind when I think of early Kansas. It's just that it's a striking image. Yeah,
Yeah.
I'd love to see
Let's
the
go.
original someday.
Yeah, that would be really cool. Let's go through this track by track. So we already
Sure.
talked about "Can I Tell You." That's the song. I believe that's one of the songs that was on the demo tape that Don Kirshner heard.
Exactly.
So for the band, a lot of people think of that band as being mainly playing a lot of Kerry Livgren songs. This song was written by Rich, Phil, Dave, and Steve. So
Yeah.
what are your thoughts on "How You"?
Love it. I mean, this is one of those ass kicking Kansas songs. Like, a lot of prog rock bands forget about the rock part, and that's fine because I mean, progressive rock, there's no rules. Like, you can be as soft as you want or go in the quieter dynamic as much as you want. However, I do love that they are a band that puts the rock in prog rock. You know what I mean? Like they
Yeah.
come out and they can bang and like Can I Tell You is a killer, and I just love it. Um, I think it's one of their strongest songs of the early era, certainly of the more straightforward material. I think it's one of the best. You got to start your album with "Can I Tell You." I don't think there's anything else on this album that they could have started and had as strong of an opening as they do with this one.
It's interesting. I mean, it's got one verse
Yeah,
and they just repeat it, but
yeah,
yet there's so much going on in between,
yeah, yeah. And
and
I
it's
love
all
the I
over the
love the
place time wise. And
yeah. Yeah, and then they show the vocal prowess immediately, even though it's a very straightforward one. I feel like you get this you get the idea that like wow, this band is stacked with talent right from the beginning, of this song. It's a really well done little piece of work. Yeah, it's a favorite.
one of the things that surprised me when I first got this album, because I'd already had probably, I'm going to say, most of the Kansas albums at this point. This came a little bit later. I was a little surprised by bringing it back. So they cover a J.J. Cale song,
Right.
and I don't hear a lot of prog on this. What are your thoughts on this one?
I don't either. I don't think it's a bad song. I look at the album list and I think all of these songs are incredible, except for this one. I think it's okay. It probably wasn't necessary. I'm not, I think it might have been a record label request. I can't remember if I've talked to Phil about that at all. But yeah, to start your album with "Can I Tell You" and then, then do a cover song. Um, it's an interesting choice. It does make you wonder too. Like if you bought this record going, "Ooh, I want to hear this early prog Kansas," you're not getting it for two songs, and it's
Yeah,
an interesting opening. But they more than make up for that as we go along. There's no
yeah.
no no question.
I mean, it does have some crazy violin work from Robbie and a great vocal.
Oh yeah, yeah,
And as far as cover songs go, I'm not picking on Van Halen or anything, but I mean, at least they didn't cover like Pretty Woman or something really well known. They
I think
picked a
it fits,
fairly obscure song to
and I
cover.
think it fits what they do. I don't
Yeah,
think it's out of place, like, yeah. Whereas, yeah, Pretty Woman, everybody knows that. And, you think more Roy Orbison than Van Halen with that song, even though
yeah.
they put their stamp on it, where this, Kansas kind of made this one their own. So, it fits in fair. It fits in well enough.
And then now that bring it down, way down for track 3, Lonely Wind. I think this is the first song that really lets you know, hey, Steve Walsh is one of the greatest singers of all time.
Yeah. Yeah. Uh, I was going to say the same thing. You took the words right out of my mouth. This is the Steve Walsh spotlight. And, yeah, I think he's gorgeous throughout this song. I think he wrote it too, did he not?
Yeah, this is a soul.
Soul Walsh
Yeah,
composition.
soul
Yeah,
Walsh. Yeah.
yeah. And this is one of those that they will play still. The latest lineup will play this live, certain sets, certain tours. So it's got a lot of staying power that way. Um, and it's kind of now we've got these two straightforward songs to start it off, and then we've got Lonely Wind, this kind of like more patient and subdued type track. It's beautiful. And then bam, we
But
get
look out.
we
Yeah.
get Prague, Kansas all the way home now after this.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing. I never really thought about it that way, but yeah, it is a unique track listing. I'm used to it. But yeah, now we get into number 4, Alexis, or
Yeah.
you know, I love it. It is so dynamic. It rocks. Um, yeah, it's one of my favorite early Kansas songs. I love the fact that they have done it in recent years. Um, I was really pleasantly surprised they opened the device voice drum uh, CD DVD with it. Yeah, I mean, what more can you say? But this is a really really complex. Is this the first? Yeah, this is the first. This is the first Livgren composition we have on here.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, and it's on this thing. Alexis goes all the way back to the super early Kansas. You can see where is it at? Here it is. I'm doing
Okay.
it. Yeah. So, yeah, you'll hear the roots of the song on that CD when you get it, and yeah, it's one of the most enduring tracks from this album. It's also one of those where it's like really dictionary definition Kansas. Like if I had to give somebody one song, I mean, of course I'd give him Icarus, of course I'd give him Death of Mother Nature Suite, but Alexis is also just trademark Kansas. It's just kind of got all the ingredients right there.
Yeah. As I will say, as does Journey for Mary Abron.
Yeah, the
Because
next one. Yeah,
that one is well, that one's Carrie and Steve, but man, this is just pure epic Kansas as well.
yeah.
And Steve's vocals are amazing on here.
Yeah, totally agree. It's just got that really wide spectrum, kind of almost cinematic feel to it. The way it rolls out, lots of events in that song. Um, and again, we get some historical lyricism here. Um, yeah, I mean, again, really well formed. Like this doesn't sound like a band on the first album. It
No, not at all.
sounds like they're 4 or 5 in because the stuff is so beautifully tailored and so expertly written and yeah, it's sculpted so nicely. It's impressive, so impressive. Yeah,
And I mean, if they stuck to the way that they began the song, because there's so many tricky time changes,
yeah,
but then in the middle they have to do the do. They have to
right.
change it up again. Like it's amazing. And
Yeah,
I remember thinking like this was down the list of albums I had to get, and thinking I'm glad I'm still getting to hear Kansas I'd never heard before. What a treat.
yeah.
Um, and then they lightened it up just a little bit for the Pilgrimage. What are your thoughts on this one?
Again, I sound like a broken record, but I love it.
Yeah.
I think it's quite beautiful. Um, it gives you a little bit of a breath. It's not as intense as some of the other stuff that's coming or has come before. Um, but again, you get that grandness, you get that grand scope, that epic scope that they do so well. And
Great harmonies, great vocal
excellent
harmonies
harp. Yeah, beautiful, beautiful. Which is
throughout
one of the
throughout
many
the entire
hallmarks of
song, I
Kansas.
think, right?
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. It's a beautiful thing. Um, I think they played that the last time I saw them. So they're still a band that will dip in and out and give you fan favorites and quote unquote deep tracks.
I
I don't.
love that too. It's not like I mean, a lot of my favorite bands, they go and they play the greatest hits, and you pretty much know what you're going to get.
Yeah,
But
yeah,
Kansas aren't afraid to tackle things that maybe they
no,
haven't played in a while.
right, right. And I know we're
So,
talking about the first album, not the new lineup, but I have to say, my defense of the new lineup is simply that um, some bands with just a couple original members, they just don't seem to have the essence of what that band really was throughout their career and through the main part of their career. I feel like that new band has it. I feel like Phil and Rich know how to pick guys that truly are born to be in Kansas. They've just somehow find these people. And so they've retained the essence of what Kansas is, despite Walsh being gone, despite Livgren being gone. You wouldn't even want Walsh in the band because he just can't sing like that anymore. They got a guy who can. So back to this album, it allows you to bring back something like The Pilgrimage or Journey from Maria Braun, which they did a few tours ago.
yeah.
Um, and nail it and make it and bring it back around to the present day, and give life to these old songs from this ancient dusty old album.
Yeah. And all anyone has to do is listen to the last two live albums they did. They opened with, they could do everything from Cold Gray Morning to People of the South Wind.
Yep.
They just there are no limits on taking in the view. Like
Yep.
it's amazing. It's amazing that they can do that.
Yeah,
All
that's
right,
absolutely right.
next.
Yeah, yeah.
Here's another one. How do you say this? Aperçu?
uh I always said apricot, but
I always pronounce it like French, like an S sound but I don't know why.
aperçu. Okay. Yeah, I
Yeah,
always said apricot, but I don't know. I've never discussed this one with Phil or Rich. It's one I haven't seen live. I don't know. I probably don't do it anymore. It's relatively obscure track on this album, but again, another great one. A lot of mystery behind this one. It's one that for a long time I couldn't put my finger on. Um, when I was learning this album and getting into early Kansas, but I think it's a beautiful track. It's placed perfectly.
yes,
I think it does exactly the right thing before, for me, the absolute ultimate highlight of the album is the next one.
yeah,
Uh, so it's not that it's overshadowed by Death of Mother Nature Suite, but I think once we start getting into the Belexis and the Journey and the Pilgrimage, this one comes in, slots in here nicely. It's a really, really stable listen at this point. Um, and yeah, this is a good one. This is one that I don't believe in deep tracks necessarily. I mean, great songs are great songs. If you like them, you like them. And if you're a fan, you listen to the entire album. But this one is a deep track, you know?
it's pretty deep. But the
Yeah.
whole song, you're right. It does sound like it's building and building and building and building, and the payoff is one of the heaviest songs to come out in 1974. I mean,
Yeah.
Death of Mother Nature Suite. I mean, that could be a Black Sabbath riff. I mean, that's pretty darn
Yes.
heavy. And yeah, I don't know what else they could have. They couldn't have followed it with anything on this album. That's got to be
Oh,
the end
no.
of it.
It does. It's Death of Mother Nature Suite is amazing. I love the message. I was already pretty well into thinking about and trying to be as active as I could in terms of environmental issues. And I think it was really important for them to get this out there, to point the finger at mankind and go, we're messing this up. We got to correct this now. And they always had that message, and I thought that was refreshing. I mean, you weren't getting that a lot um, from bands back then. Um, and like you say, it's very Sabbathy. I think that on every Kansas album in the '70s, you can hear what I call the proto metal in Kansas. They covered quite a span. They could sound like Leonard Skinner one song. They could sound like Genesis and ELP another song, and then they could sound like Sabbath or that more metallic Rush, um, and just do these riffs that I'm sure were inspiring to kids that later went on to metal bands. There's a very heavy element and what we know as early heavy metal in early Kansas. They were just there with it. You know, a lot of it's the tone. Rich Williams, especially Kerry Livgren, yes, of course, but Rich Williams had a tone that just killed. Like he was really, really ripping type tones, whether it was him flying into these leads or laying down a seriously heavy, doomy type of riff. Um, he was all about the tone, and man, it's a metallic tone throughout their catalog. And Death of Mother Nature Suite is their proto metal song on this album.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's pretty powerful. And I mean, 50 years ago, the lyrics still ring true today. And this is definitely not the last time that they would attempt something like this. I mean, you think of something like Nobody's Home from Point of No Return. I mean, they definitely return to this theme. But I mean, we know that the guys, you know, especially you know, guys in Fate's Warning were
Huge
Kansas
fans.
fans. It just stands to reason that you'd be, you know,
Yeah,
influenced by this stuff.
absolutely. Yeah,
I
absolutely.
do like the fact, I love the fact actually that after they left Overture and Point of No Return became big, I love the fact that the first three albums went certified gold. That got those into a lot of homes, and I think it's worthwhile. So,
For
yeah,
sure.
that's our look at the debut album from Kansas, self-titled as most debuts are. I love the
Love.
fact that also on Miracles Out of Nowhere they recreated this photo, which was
I was
so cool.
just gonna say
Um,
that. I love that. Yeah, they went to that exact same
that
spot.
exact same
Yeah,
spot. I wonder if they went to that same McDonald's where. Remember that?
yeah, yeah,
I
yeah,
thought that was pretty funny. So let's go take it. Let's go take a photo at McDonald's. But anyway,
yeah, yeah.
all right. So this is just the beginning, folks. We're going to go through the entire Kansas catalog. May have a revolving cast of co-hosts, but Jeff, thanks for helping me get this started. I
Man,
couldn't think of
anytime.
anyone better to help get it started with. And tell the folks what you've got on the go right now. You've got your Voivod shirt on. I think that's part of it, right?
Yeah, I mean, I have a lot of Voivod shirts, so it's not like I'm plugging the book right now. I'm just this is just how I woke up and what I put on. But I am rounding the corner on this Voivod book that I've been working on for years. A lot of different reasons that it's taken a while, but I am being pretty fussy on every little aspect of it. But I've been seeing layouts from my layout guy. Away, the drummer from Voivod, has been approving chapters as I go along. So that's really been part of the delay was just, you know, him trying to find time to do this because he's got a lot on his plate. But now we're cruising. I got about 25% of the thing laid out. It should be announced. The title and the cover should be announced somewhere around July, and I'll probably start taking pre-orders at the very latest in, you know, October to get them out for like holiday season. But it could very well happen before that as well. So we'll see. But yeah, that's my next book that'll be published. And yeah, the previous one, the Fates Warning book, still cooking. You can get that at fateswarningbook.com or Amazon. Um, yeah, and it's and I'm still doing the Radical Research podcast. These are my pretty main my main focuses beyond simply listening to music, which is of course the thing I like to do the most.
Right on. Yeah,
Don't we
I
all?
can't recommend the Fates Warning book enough for sure.
Thank you.
So, Jeff, thanks for doing this.
Yeah.
And folks, we're going to see you again in a week or so for part 2 of the Kansas Deep Dive. Hope you've enjoyed this. Thanks, everybody, for watching. Tim's Vinyl Confessions. Go listen to some Kansas.